Hello everyone, Books with Banks back again with an exciting one for you today. So I've mentioned and teased in a few videos my recent interest in the Warhammer 40k hobby. Last summer I read a couple short stories and a couple novels, all by Dan Abnett, one of the authors writing in the tie-in fiction literature side of the hobby. I enjoyed what I read then. I also was really enjoying listening to different YouTubers and podcasts all about the lore of the world. Two YouTubers in particular caught my attention: Arbiter Ian with his thorough and entertaining lore deep dives, and his friend Mira Manga with her author interviews. Mira was kind enough to join me on my channel last year to help me kind of navigate my first steps into this crazy world. Both Mira and Ian do a book club together where they've been reading the epic 54 plus book Horus Heresy series, so they definitely inspired me to turn my attention to that specific part of this whole universe and fandom. Their channels are linked below. So today, now that I've read the first three books in this epic Horus Heresy series, these three right here, I wanted to share my thoughts, reactions, and give advice or if anyone out there might be interested in starting the series. I'll also share a bit of what I plan to read next as far as Horus Heresy stuff goes. So here's how we'll structure the video. In part one, I'll give just some broader context for Warhammer 40k and the hobby in general, in case you're totally new to all of this. In part two, I'll give some more specific context for the Horus Heresy or 30k era of the hobby. And then in part three, I'll get into talking about the books more specifically. In that part, first, I'll kind of talk about the overall strengths of just these books as a trilogy in the series so far. Then I'll talk about Horus Rising Book 1 more specifically. Then I'll talk about Book 2, False Gods. And then finally I'll talk about Galaxy in Flames Book 3. At the end of the video, I'll wrap up my thoughts, briefly rank these three books, and say what I plan to read next. So, first things first, a bit of context is probably a good idea for those of you unfamiliar with Warhammer. So this is basically the grimmest and darkest of grimdark, far future, epic sci-fi settings. In the 41st millennium and beyond, you have three larger groups of factions vying for control of the galaxy, various strategic points and planets. You have the Imperium of Man, basically what's become of the human race. They're authoritarian, religious fundamentalist, genocidal, xenophobic, just horrible kind of mindset, mission to control the galaxy. Many humans are technologically enhanced and or they have psychic powers. The human race basically worships the horribly wounded emperor of mankind, wounded now for 10,000 years after the civil war that was the Horus Heresy. That's an incredibly simplified version of things, but you have several factions within that larger group. Your iconic Space Marines, your Adeptus Custodes, Astra Militarum, etc. The second group of factions, the Xenos, these are all of the other alien races out there in the galaxy. And the third group, Chaos, basically demons and creatures of chaos, as well as members from any of those other groups and factions who have fallen to chaos, such as Chaos Space Marines, and or anyone worshipping any of the four gods of chaos and the warp. And the warp's a dark, chaotic parallel dimension where any psychers or magic users really pull their power from. The warp can also help and disrupt any group's capacity for interstellar travel. The main tabletop game that a lot of people get miniatures for to throw into combat against each other. This is usually set in roughly this 41st millennium era with different players different players collecting and playing armies from any of those different factions. So that's Warhammer 40k simplified, but what about the Horus Heresy? Well, the Horus Heresy isn't exactly 40k, but rather 30k, because it's the story of a roughly decade-long conflict set 10,000 years before most of that main 40k setting. The Horus Heresy does in fact have its own game and box sets of miniatures to collect if you'd rather play games and stage battles from this 30k setting instead. The third edition of that game is actually about to be released, or that edition's initial box set. Okay, so what is the Horus Heresy and who's Horus? Remember that Emperor of Man I mentioned? Well, he's still alive and well in the 30k time period, and people aren't supposed to really worship him, not supposed to really worship anything at all. The Emperor, he has these 20 demigod-like sons, but they're not really sons. They're more like different weird genetic experiments to create powerful generals and commanders to help the Emperor reclaim the galaxy from whatever xenospecies are out there. The Emperor is basically trying to reunite all the fractured pockets of humanity all over the place back under his rule. And this conquest is violent, genocidal, brutal, not much prettier or kinder than the 40k setting. But there is a bit more hope and optimism in this era, and there might be an end, or there's more optimism that there might be an end in sight to all the warfare and bloodshed. This hope is important for one of the kind of central thematic through lines of at least these 3 books. It's a question of sort of why is there hope? So all of the 20 demigods are called Primarchs, and they all lead their own unique legions of space marines. As this conquest of the galaxy continues, different Primarchs and their legions come into contact with mysterious magical powers of the warp and possibly chaos, and at least in these first few books here, that's an important plot point. This idea that we start off with most people not really knowing anything about chaos or its existence, and then what happens when they are exposed to that. The Emperor knows, and a couple of his Primarchs know more than others. But not only are these books the story of how Horus turns traitor to start a civil war against the Emperor, but it's also about how the Imperium of Man comes into contact with the forces of chaos and the warp. In terms of Horus turning traitor, though, that's basically what the Civil War is all about. At the start here, only 18 of the 20 Primarchs remain, with an asterisk kind of next to one of those numbers. No need to really get into that. And of the 18 Primarchs, 8 of them side with Horus, and the other 9 side with the Emperor, traitor versus loyal. So here I'll talk briefly about spoilers, which is a little strange for this type of video. I'll try my best not to spoil anything too specific from these 3 books, or from what I understand about the Horus Heresy more generally, but if you just Google Horus Heresy or you start looking into the lore, you'll see a lot of these big important turning points in battles and betrayals and so on. You'll see all of this come up about the heresy. A lot of it's just pretty widely accepted lore. So if I say something like, this book has a massive betrayal in it, that's not so much a spoiler for this series as it would be maybe for a different series, because a lot of the fun with these books is the authors anticipating these big moments they assume at least some of their readers might already have some idea about. That said, if you're intrigued by what I've talked about so far, and you want to pick up these books as fresh and spoiler-free as possible, I totally understand if you want to tune out now. Totally cool. But I will do my best to avoid any super specific spoilers. I'll do my best to not spoil anything too emotional or any of my favorite moments from these 3. Okay. So how are these books? What are these books even? So by the end of book 3 here, I'm not sure if you could even say the Civil War proper has even started. It's basically right there. It's about to begin. But from what I understand, there's this event coming known as the Istvan 5 Drop Site Massacre, and that's really the first official battle of the war, and we're not quite there yet, even after these 3 books. So if these books don't get into the war, what do they cover? As mentioned above, mostly it's about the fall of Horus and important space marines and his legions, many of whom also fall to chaos. These books tell the story of how Horus is equal parts tricked, trapped, manipulated, but also how he's making pivotal decisions and how he has some amount of free will to eventually turn against the Emperor. And these books are about mankind coming to witness more examples of chaos. These books also deal a lot with people starting to respond to that chaos exposure by worshiping their emperor. So there's some wonderful conversations about faith and belief and worship. That's not all. Easily my favorite thing here in the series so far are the remembrancers and the iterators. These are your artists and academics, all charged to accompany or with accompanying the Primarchs and their Space Marine legions out into the galaxy to keep track of all the heroic deeds in this important historical conquest. So the artists and academics, they do a lot of propaganda work. But then some of the artists, at least at first, are invited to use whatever they see as inspiration for their art. Okay, so let's get a little bit more specific now. I'm going to go through each of these 3 books and give my reactions to them and my general overall thoughts. So first we have book 1, Horus Rising by Dan Abnett. This book was first published by the Games Workshop publishing branch, Black Library, back in 2006. Abnett is the only author of these first 3 that I had any familiarity with. Having read a couple of his 40K era books, his writing style here is a bit different though, having a more grand or epic tone to really convey the weight of the events unfolding. So Horus Rising is basically a story in 3 parts or episodes. Part 1, Horus and his Luna Wolves Legion, the 16th Legion. They conquer a planet believing itself to be Terra with its own emperor. Our main character is Garviel Loken, captain of the 10th Company, and newest addition to Horus's Mournival, or basically his collection of the 4 officers he trusts the most to advise him. In addition to Loken, we also follow the cynical and bitter poet Ignis Carcassy, the photographer Euphrates Keeler, and another sort of sci-fi documentarist named Mercedes Olaton. Again, trying to remain pretty spoiler-free. Basically, some spooky stuff happens before the Luna Wolves have to move on to kind of that second part, the rescue mission, sort of. And this is where we meet my favorite guys, some of the Emperor's Children Legion. Definitely the Legion I'm thinking most about playing if I ever get more into the tabletop part of the hobby. And as events transpire throughout that rescue mission, kind of turns into a war, our characters will eventually end up in a 3rd setting, or kind of a 3rd section, final section. Again, won't really say what happens there to avoid spoilers. So really what you have here is a pretty episodic story in which Abnett is able to establish the setting and to fill it out with more life and world building to make it a believable and somewhat attractive setting. Also, essentially, Abnett had to make the Imperium of Man in 30K distinct from its 40K counterpart, and I think he really succeeded there. Abnett also does a great job dragging out the tension here with only a couple sort of breaches of chaos, because basically the Emperor and a few others have done a great job at shielding humanity from the horrors of chaos, but also from any awareness of it. And it's kind of to the point where it feels a little deceptive. Like, why not tell people so that they can better defend themselves against these evil things that are out there? Well, Abnett shows us a few moments in which our protagonists here are confronted with these new mysterious powers that have the potential to corrupt anyone, even someone as powerful and as beloved as War Master Horus. Before I move on to talk about the other books, I'll say really quickly that I think what Abnett does better than the other 2 authors by far is his character work with the Remembrancers and the Marines. He had to do a lot of the heavy lifting here to get us attached to these characters, so then the next 2 authors could rely on what Abnett already did here, and they could use their page count, word count, whatever, to excel in other ways and explore their own strengths. None of these books are bad, and I could believe any of these 3 is someone's favorite, but all of the authors do excel in slightly different ways. So now, moving on to book 2, False Gods. Again, this was also published by Black Library in 2006. This one was written by Graham McNeil, and this book feels a bit more focused for the most part, all on one significant sequence of events, the events on the planet Davin and the moon of Davin. Those familiar with the lore of the Heresy, I believe even before these books came out, would have known about the significance of this mission. Basically, a formerly conquered planet under the leadership of the politicians and commanders left to maintain order has turned rebel against the Empire somehow. And this is something everyone previously believed to be impossible or highly improbable. Eugen Temba, the guy who was left in charge, he's gone to the moon and declared this rebellion. So all of our favorite characters from the first book, the Marines and Remembrancers of the Luna Wolves, transitioning to their new name now, the Sons of Horus, they all come to this planet for Horus to personally take care of Eugen Temba. Meanwhile, a shadowy side character, the Space Marine Erebus of the 17th Wordbearers Legion, has been accompanying Horus and his legion, and Erebus is definitely scheming and working behind the scenes. Keep an eye on that character in this series. On Davin's moon, everyone is forced to fight putrid, rotting monsters, zombie people, all empowered by chaos in some way, all connected to the chaos god Nurgle. Horus eventually finds and confronts a warped and twisted Eugen Temba, and Horus is wounded, but I'll leave it at that again to avoid more specific spoilers. So in this book, you start to see more of a rift, a divide in the philosophies of the Sons of Horus Legion. Some will stop at nothing to save their War Master, even if that goes against Imperial law and common sense, whereas others are a bit more cautious. For the first time, really, we see the tension between those who are more loyal to Horus and those who are more loyal to the Emperor. Two things McNeill does really well here. Abnett subtly introduces the idea of turning to an illegal practice of worshipping the Emperor as a divine figure to help mere mortals cope with the new discovery of chaos, but McNeill gets a lot more page time to play around with these ideas of religion and faith, and this prohibited worship of the Emperor. Really fascinating stuff. You also have more in here with artists being critical of the Space Marines, and some who believe this is a great thing, to hear this criticism and this open and honesty. That's the point of these artists being there, while others believe these critics doing so is a threat. So really, really fun conversations around all of that. I'll also add that I think what McNeill does best, better than the other two, is his staging and setting up of these epic scenes and moments. Two moments really stand out to me from this book. First, there's a moment on the Poison Moon where they find the crashed wreckage of a massive ship, and the Marines all have to tackle this colossal wreckage to try to get to their objective. Just the way the ship is described and how everyone's approaching it. And then when part of it collapses, it's all super exciting, super well done. The second scene that really jumps out to me is when some of our protagonists are racing to a temple with thousands of worshippers all around. It's raining. There's these beautiful steps leading up to the temple doors. It's a really dramatic, intense moment, very emotional, but I could just so easily visualize it all like I was watching this in a movie or a TV show. So hats off to McNeill for all of that. I'll add two things about this book that could be points of criticism for others, though I personally don't mind them that much. Because we're headed towards civil war, Horus's fall to chaos, his turn against the Emperor, and so on, again, shouldn't be super spoilery really, but a big chunk of at least what were shown to be the things that convince and or manipulate Horus into making the pivotal decision. A lot of that stuff happens in this book, and I believe some readers might feel like it makes Horus look like a far more impulsive or childish character than what we were presented with in book 1, Horus Rising. I actually don't mind the quickness of these events, and I like to keep in mind with Horus's character in particular. With this book being the exception, the other two of the three books I'm talking about today keep Horus at much more of a distance from the readers. So whatever we understand about his nobility and his genius is all filtered through the lens of those most loyal to him. And I do kind of like to take his more gullible and impulsive behaviors from this book as more accurate than what we're simply told about him in the first book. So that's one point of criticism that I could see others raising that I don't really mind. The other thing that's a bit odd with this one, just real quickly, the final section feels like it races through a seemingly pivotal and important conflict with the people known as the Oretian technocracy. And so the ending here does feel a little bit rushed. All that said, still really loved this book. Okay, so now moving on to our third and final book of the video, Book 3, Galaxy in Flames by Ben Counter. Again, also same year and same publisher. I'll add here too that these are all around 400 pages, mass market paperback, so none of them are particularly large time commitments. So what's our third book about? Well, Horus has been slowly but surely building his alliances with some of his brother Primarchs, and now 4 legions are on their way to stamp out another rebellion, but this time it's in the Istvan system. While this rebellion might actually be a worthy threat to take care of, something they might have needed to do anyway, Horus and his allies are really going to use this massive battle plan to squash the rebellion as a bit of cover and sort of their opportunity to rid their legions of those within whom they suspect of being more loyal to the Emperor than to the Primarchs. That's a really simplified version of what's going on here, but again, I don't want to give too much away, aside from kind of the grand sweeping moment of the betrayal, something that the wiki search of the heresy would probably spoil for you anyway. So the first half of this book is basically the characters we've come to know and love, all building up to this big Order 66 type of event, with little sneak peeks at the corruption in some of the other legions, like the Emperor's Children, Death Guard, and World Eaters. I really love how Counter writes his Emperor's Children characters in particular. So the first half builds up to this infamous moment, and the second half is basically the fallout and all of the efforts to survive or hold out just a little bit longer for a lot of the characters still left alive. I should also add that there's one group of characters, some of my favorites, plus 1 or 2 intriguing new ones, who kind of just disappear 2/3 of the way through the book. From what I understand, that's because Book 4 is the story of what happens to that group. I'll say my main negative with this book first, actually. So the moment-to-moment gunplay, battle tactics, who's punching whom, cutting people up with swords, the carnage of battle, it's not my favorite stuff to read about in any of these books, and there is understandably and unavoidably so much more of that in this one. I also think I struggled to picture Counter's descriptions of battle scenes and sequences as clearly as I could picture Abnett's or especially McNeil's. But that's pretty much all the negative I have for this one. For positives, we have so many. Probably most importantly, just the events being described are some of the most intense and emotional of all 3 books so far. And while McNeil introduced us to the crew in charge of running one of the massive walking tank machines of war, right there, you can see it kind of behind the name or title label, this massive machine of war, a Titan called the Dace Arai, something like that. I found Counter's work with that crew and the image of that Titan and its role in this story. I found Counter's incorporation of all the Titan stuff here much more compelling. Counter also really continues the religion and faith in the Emperor themes, at least as strongly as McNeil did. Especially when he's focusing on the Iterator character Kirill Sinderman, a great character throughout this trilogy, but Counter really makes him shine. So, with all of that said, how would I personally rank these first 3 books? While I love all 3 of them, and I've had a blast reading them all, I think personally I found Galaxy in Flames the weakest, but still an outstanding emotional roller coaster. Then Book 1, Horus Rising, is in the middle, as it is a beautiful introduction to the setting with some great hints at how quickly things are about to go wrong, and really wonderful introductions to these characters. But my favorite so far has to be False Gods. I love how McNeil stages his epic moments. I love the deeper exploration of religion starting here. I love what he does with Loken and the poet Carcassy. And even though there aren't any Emperor's Children in this one, I do love the lore behind Nurgle, the god of pestilence and disease. So False Gods is my favorite, but it's barely better than Horus Rising, which is barely better than Galaxy in Flames. They're all quite good. I am really looking forward to Book 4, Flight of the Eisenstein by James Swallow, to find out what happened to some of my favorite characters there. But I'm especially looking forward to Book 5, Fulgrim, as it's apparently all about the Emperor's children, and I've heard some really intriguing but also really twisted things about that book. And it's written by Graham McNeil, so that's a big plus as well. All that said, please let me know down below in the comments if maybe you've never really gotten into Warhammer and whether or not this video intrigued you at all in Horus Heresy series. Also, let me know if maybe you're a big fan of the hobby, maybe you're a big fan of these books in particular, and you'd like to share your thoughts about these three or the series overall. I'd love to hear, any and all such comments. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.